All right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me this morning. We're going to be looking at lesson 5. So one of the trickier lessons in my experience within the course here. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at um, mainly looking at micro watersheds and how those can influence your project site. So got some examples to show you. I was also going to, I've just kind of randomly set up one of your, I'm not sure which student it was, but I took somebody's project site and we're going to look at their micro watershed just as an example, go through that. So without further ado, let me just share my screen. Okay, there we go. So lesson number 5, yeah, it's and I can only speak from experience, but with the work my wife and myself do, whether it's acreage or urban landscapes, we give water the priority, and as we go through the class, we'll show more. I'll show more examples of what we do. And I'm not suggesting that's what anybody else should do, but it's just great to always see what others are um, providing as far as deliverables. And then, it gives you a place to start and to modify things the way you see them best fitting into your workflow. If, assuming you're moving forward with designing for others in the future. But one of the things that we do after we have our base plan and our sector map created is we look at the water, what we call the water layer. And that's essentially what lesson 5 is about. We're looking at, we're doing a water survey, as you can see, and this is pretty straightforward. Just some basic questions on where your water comes from and where the wastewater goes. And those are very interesting. Also, your 24-hour record rain event, if you have that data. So if you lived in a fairly close to, a city or town that has an airport, often there's, climate data taken there. And it shouldn't be hard to find a record rainfall event, but for some of you in more remote locations, it might be tricky. So if you can find it, or even find that a rain event that's close to you, it could be helpful in terms of planning because you do want to have an idea. For instance, where I live, record rainfall event here is around the 90 millimeter mark. So in US units, that would be, uh, you know, about 3.5 inches. So somewhere in there. And that's quite a bit of rain for where I live. So when we're putting together water systems, we want to have that in the back of our mind, that potentially we could see 3.5 inches of rain in a day. And how would that look if we're collecting rainwater or we have a rain garden or whatever it happens to be? So we really, it's kind of our first step in um, designing for potential flows. And that could be stormwater management. We've been involved with some projects, and I think I've seen, I'm not sure if it's this class, but in some project sites, you end up with the house lower than the um, access road. And there can be, that can sort of set up little challenges where you have water flowing down that road surface right towards the house. So That's a good case in point with that record rainfall event. So if you had that scenario, it gives you a good idea of the volume of water you're going to have to manage if that happens. So yeah, so that's fairly interesting. It's just 4 points. So that's not a huge part of the assignment, but it is an interesting one. And the roofing material. So this is a part that can really throw a wrench into some people's plans. And we've even had this happen with clients that want to capture and store rainwater for annual vegetable garden use. And turns out the roofing material is not appropriate. So, and sometimes it's even a new roof, which can be even more painful. Um, so things like asphalt shingle, you want to be very mindful of that product because of the hydrocarbons and the fire retardants that are inherently part of that. So rainwater coming off of that surface is going to have trace amounts and, well, at varying degrees. When the roof is new, they'll be at higher concentrations, and as the roof ages, that will diminish. But there's not a lot of solid science on that one. So you do want to be mindful. There's, rumors out there that after 5 years or 7 years, it's okay to reuse it on annual vegetables, but that is um, that doesn't have any solid data to back it up. Not that I've seen anyhow. So just be cautious of that. Some of the best ways to reuse that water are rain gardens. And I was actually just going for a walk this morning around the rain garden we created last fall, and just amazing how it's performed over the winter. And we've been in a very, very dry winter for our region, and it continues to be so. We haven't had any significant rain for quite some time, but the rain garden's thriving, and it's great to see. So I will stay on path here. We're then going to look at watershed maps. So this is where most people have challenges, and not so much with the macro. Those are easy to get. You go onto a search engine and you just type in, watershed, Portland, or wherever you happen to be, and boom, you get these beautiful maps online. They're quite easy to find, certainly in North America. When we start getting outside of the US and Canada, if you go like in Asia, it gets a little trickier. But for um, basically everybody who's in this class, you're not going to have any problems with that. What you may have trouble with, you may find challenging, is the micro watershed. So that's when we're starting to really zoom in and dial down towards your project site. Excuse me, there's a lot of grass pollen around today. Excuse me. So the micro watershed's really looking at the project site and what neighboring properties uh, are above it and have water running off of that could influence your site. So this is the tricky part, and I'm going to go spend some time today and run through that with you, do a couple of examples, and hopefully that'll be a little easier to take a look at yourself. And it does take some practice. So we have a practice sheet that's part of your template file. That would be the first, I'm pretty sure it's the first page of that lesson. Let me just check. I'll bring that. Just bear with me 2 seconds here. Yes, it is. So this is a great place to start. And this is basically that micro watershed practice sheet. So here is our project site right here. And we have contours and we have labels on them. So we know that this is uphill from the project site. And this area is going to have an influence on the project site itself. And what we want to do is define that boundary. So there are, if we zoom out here, there are some tutorials that you can take a look at. And we are going to take a look at that today. We're going to go through a few ourselves, but there is some definitely a number of different tutorials you can take a look at. And this is the takeaway right here is water flows at a right angle to a contour. So we can tell when we look at a contour map. Now, granted, these are 10-foot contours, so it's a fairly broad view, right? It's so as we get more and more contours or a higher resolution, you would get more precision. But in this scale, this works really well. And we know that water is going to run right angle to that contour. So we'll go through a couple of these just to show you how we can do that. We won't. I'm not going to work on the practice sheet here, but we will work on a few people's projects themselves, make it a little more relevant. So that's probably the biggest piece that you'll want to focus on with this regard. If you can nail the micro watershed, that's fabulous. And that's going to give you a great, it's that important part of the toolbox when we're looking at permaculture design is how water moves through the site and what sites are influencing our own. And sometimes, there's been a few students that basically they're on top of a mound or a ridge, and there's nobody influencing their sites, right? They are their own micro watershed, and that may be the case. And in that case, your micro watershed boundary is your property boundary. So we'll go through that, and then we're going to take some of that data and go on to the site water flow analysis, where we're going to do a map, and we're going to show where water comes onto the site and where it leaves. We're going to look at impervious surfaces. We're going to look at where we could potentially put gray water, where there's outdoor taps, other impermeable surfaces. So, driveways, patios, even whether they're gravel or asphalt or concrete, doesn't matter. Gravel driveway is basically impermeable, but it will have its own coefficient factor, as we'll get into later. And then some of these other water elements, wetlands, ponds, creeks, and to do the micro, sorry, I'm skipping words here. Micro watershed portion of the assignment, you definitely need contour lines. You cannot do it without it. So we'll show you how we can find that. And then there's some charts to go through here. And this is somewhat Very similar to some of the information we collect when we're sizing a rainwater harvesting system. We need to know the average annual rainfall, and we actually break it down into month by month. And then the roof area, and we're also looking at that too. So different roof areas and impermeable surfaces. Obviously, if it's coming off the roof, that's more potentially for storage, and off the driveway, that's more stormwater. So you wouldn't be collecting that in a cistern, but you might be sending that into a rain garden or into a pond or some other rainwater harvesting structure. And then we're looking at so total rainfall in a year. And like I say, we break that down into month by month when we're looking at it. And then totals during that 24-hour rain event, as well as a average annual as stated above. Yeah, so it's an interesting exercise to go through, and you do have to make some predictions, but there's some good tools along the way to at least give you an idea. And I can show you one one project that we've been involved with, um, where we've just gone through this, and it's a very unusual property in that it was getting quite a bit of, well, it has a challenge with winter water. So yeah, we'll look at that, but we won't jump ahead here. Maybe what we'll do now is I'll just stop sharing and we can jump over and take a look at some examples here, because these examples are from previous students and they're very useful. And the examples I'm going to show you are ones where the students haven't really grasped the concept here. So it's actually useful in that regard. We're not trying to be judgmental or anything. It's just we want to give you an idea of where you may end up. So this person did a perfect job on their micro watershed practice sheet. And then they found a beautiful macro watershed map. So no shortage of those online. And then had a little bit of challenge here with the micro watershed. So the micro watershed is just like this. So what is directly influencing the project site? And a few things here. This contour map isn't labeled at all. It does have a legend here, but it's not, these aren't clear, so that makes it a little bit tricky. We have to kind of reference both. But we can see here in this image, and let me just get my draw tool happening here. Okay, so we can see the project site, and as the colors go to blue on Contour Creator here, the elevation's dropping. And as we go to green, yellow, orange, even though they're not all listed here, they're rising. So we know in this situation, we have elevation gain to the east, and that this is where water could potentially flow onto the property. Now, there's a couple of caveats here. If this was all forested and without any roads, then you know that the water flows are pretty predictable. When we get into a situation like this, where we have access roads and other properties involved, Let me just zoom in a little bit here to demonstrate this better. Okay. So the things that we need to look for, this looks like a road right here. There's something going on here. That could be a road. It's really difficult in this small screen to figure out what's going on in terms of roadways, but you can see a bunch down here, right? And these are all constraints. So what happens, as you know, is it's pretty infrequent that you'll see water uh, flowing over a roadway from one side of the road to the other. I mean, maybe in extreme events, but these, even out in a rural setting, these roads are going to be most often have ditches beside them. So that water flow, in this case, let me just get my little tool. There we go. So in this case, we have a roadway here, and I can see one is here. So even though we have elevation gain on the east side, this roadway is going to be like a big ditch or a big dam. So it's not going to permit water traveling from this property in this direction. Oops, wrong way. So if water's traveling this way, it's actually going to hit that road and go in another direction rather than continuing on to the project site. So that's a constraint to keep in the back of your mind. What is the road network look like? And that's more so with urban, but even in a rural area, it can play a part in that. So let's zoom out here a bit. There are some examples here. So those are worth looking at. Those are on your template file itself. And let's look at another example here. So in this is an urban example. And you can see it's very flat, and that's typical, right? And the project site was right here. I can't remember exactly where that property boundary was, but it's something like that. So in this case, you can see there's some elevation gain over here, and there's a low spot here. And this is the same contour running all the way around here. So this student was able to show us the flow of water, which is really important, but not actually the watershed boundary. So if I was drawing that right now, and this would be pretty rough, I would actually try and get slightly higher resolution. In Contour Creator, you can ask for half-foot contours, and that would help a little bit. But typically we want to start at the low point, which would be over here. And it looks like the boundary would run something like this. And now we've run out of space. So this is a case where we'd have to zoom out a little bit more to see what's beyond this house. So you have to kind of work in reverse order. So we're starting at the lowest point on the property boundary. And the reason I went up like this is we know that, and actually I should probably refine that a little bit. Uh, Water runs at right angle. So if we go up here, that's pretty much right angle to this point. So we kind of have to go in reverse order. And then from here, we know it's going to be about there for that to happen. And then it gets a little easier. But that's an example but we're going to run through one of these in its entirety. It's a little bit difficult to, because most people have challenges with this. And then what'll happen is part of my video review, we will go over and we'll fix it. So here's a micro watershed, and this student did a great job. This looks really good. Here's the property boundary, although we don't see the actual micro watershed boundary. So they did get stuck. And you can tell that we needed a bit more contour information above the site here. So above the site is definitely influencing the project site, but we needed to have a little bit more of a view up here to know where that began. It looks like, very close to the top of a ridge. And so those are a couple of examples. Let us go to Allie's. She's probably not aware we're going to do this. So I took Allie's address, and this is a good example of an urban setting and how roads can be, quite an influence on a project site. Now, I think it's this one right here. So what I will do, I'll just do a rough project site boundary in red. Oh, that is not red. There we go. There we go. So that is the project site boundary, or even if it isn't, this is what we're doing in our example. So once we know that, and once we have the contour information, this is easy. So with Contour Map Creator, you can see the settings I have here. We've got it on level interval. So every 1 foot, we're going to get a contour, and I've put it into feet. We could change that. I'd have to get out of my drawing mode to do that. We could make that 0.5. And then we go redraw contours, and we'll do that. So maybe we'll do that for this exercise. Now, do bear in mind that this is not that accurate, and you wouldn't want to use this for professional purposes. But for this exercise, it's super helpful. It's easy for most people to get some data on their project site without having to spend money to do so, because that can be tricky. That's basically how we start a lot of our, well, I'm not sure why I'm not going into it. There we are. Get a little of that blue line. All right. Let's draw some lines here. So based on our project boundary and this info, we know this is the low point, right? So these contours are low in the landscape, and these are higher, and it's even higher over across the road. But again, the road is a constraint. So we are pretty much in this situation, our micro watershed is going to be constrained by roadways. So even though elevation exists over here, it's not going to have an influence on the site. The water is going to go onto the road surface, and it'll end up in a catch basin and be taken away. It's not going to influence the project site. So if we started to do a micro watershed here, we'd start at this low point, and we're basically going to run all the way up the side here. And you'll have to excuse squiggly lines here. This is not normally the software I use. But now we're at the corner of the project site, and we're going to kind of work in reverse order here. So we know we can see some gains in elevation here. And we're kind of going right angle to contour. And then this is a high point, and it might come over something like that. And when we get to this side of the project site boundary, that's all sloping away. So we know that our micro watershed will not include anything here because this has no influence on our project site. So as you can see here, our watershed basin is basically that, right? So if I could fill all that in, that is the micro watershed. It's not huge, but a little bit is coming off of the neighbor's property. So that's one example. We will look at another one. And maybe what I'll do, I will head more towards where I live. All right. Let's take a look at this here. This has roads that are spread out quite a bit. So we're going to do 1 foot contours. So once you've got that location that you want to have, we're just going to put a couple of I might have to reload this. Yeah, contour map creator is a little bit tricky at times. There we go. We'll try again. Okay. So we will make sure we're on feet, and we have 1 foot contours, and that we have a level interval. And those are the settings we want to make sure we get right. And then if I click in the top and lower section, we can adjust these, but I know the roadways are going to be the constraint here, so I'm not going to go beyond those. Really? Okay. And then what we do is we just say get data. So we get this contour data here. And let us say, let's say this house here was our project site. So we're going to put in a boundary. It's very arbitrary. I'm assuming it would be something pretty close to that. But in this example, you can see blue is low, and actually this is water down here. This is the ocean or shore. And then elevation is gaining as we're going up away from it. So, darn, I didn't actually get enough in the screen before I started the draw process. So let me try that again. That's a little better, even though it's harder to. Okay, we'll just say it's here. So the bottom portion of that property line is where we're going to start, and I will be in blue. So you can tell that it's flowing away. So really, we're coming straight up the property boundary here. There's nothing influencing us on the east side. As soon as we get up to this corner, though, we can see it's a little hard because of the resolution here, but we can see that these contours, they're pretty consistent, and I wouldn't say this is completely accurate. Best I can do at the moment. That might come that way. Also might come that way. Let me just erase that last one. Uh-oh, don't want to keep erasing. There we go. And you can see this is kind of approximate. So we're going all the way up here, and then we're going to hit this parking lot. So we know, and then we have a roadway. So we know that nothing beyond this road is going to be an influence. So that's this one side, and we're going to have to work the other side, and they kind of meet up. So this is kind of how I would see this. Again, if I was doing this for the assignment, or I'd be a little more careful. All right. So you can see with that property boundary, I'll just do the outside edge. So this would be the micro watershed boundary, and then on the inside of it's going to be the basin. So that's a remarkable amount of space that could directly impact the project site. And I know this part of Lanceville, and funny enough, there are some big cottonwoods and some moisture-loving trees right here. So by going through this exercise, you can see why that might be, because they are receiving a lot of runoff. It's very dry up at the top here, and there's more soil moisture available as we get further down towards the project site here. So Once we have that, we can calculate that area on Google Earth, and that gives us a really good sense of, in a high rain event, how much water may be flowing on the surface towards the project site, and what could we do in order to ensure that it's not going to have a negative impact, so that it is a positive or an asset. Um, so I hope that helps people out. I don't know if anybody has any question about that. Happy to, oops, making a mess here. Happy to go over that in more detail with anybody if they wish. And I'm lucky I get to practice this every class on many different people's assignments here. So it gets easier, but it does take a little bit of practice. So if you're struggling with it, not to worry. That's something that, um, I would expect. Let's see here. Let us just switch back to our document, and then we can look at our questions here. So Anne had a question. So I guess this is referring to the first part of the assignment where we're looking at that water survey and water source. So in addition to drinking water, if they have irrigation water, should I create a slide for that or just do one or another? Well, that's a good question, Anne. I would say we're looking at drinking water sources. So that is probably different than rights to irrigation water, if that's what you're talking about. Um, Let me just take a look at, uh-oh. We'll open it in a new tab here. So we'll just take a look at Anne's site. Aha. Okay. Yes, now I remember it. So it's agricultural site, so there may be some access to irrigation water. Yeah, so I will type in the answer here for Anne after the call, but basically with the survey, we're asking for drinking water. So that would be a potable water source and not irrigation water. That's interesting that you could put a note in there, right? You could have irrigation water access as well, but we're really looking at potable water source. So hopefully that answers Anne's question. I don't think she's on the call today. Yeah. So how does everybody feel about micro watersheds? Is that a little bit more, is there a little bit more clarity with that, or do we need to look at another example, or how is everybody feeling? We've got about 10 minutes left on the call today. So happy to hear your thoughts in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, whatever works for you. Maybe while I'm waiting on that, I can just show you. Might be difficult to show you. Okay, Joshua definitely seems challenging. Yeah, it takes a bit of practice, Joshua. Well, I'll show you one of the files that we're working on right now, and it'll show you a similar thing. Just getting my software to load here. It's slowly loading. Okay. All right. I will just share another screen. And this is not going to necessarily make a lot of sense to you at the moment. Okay. Yeah, it's a QGIS file that I have. I'm trying to remember where I was at. Those are the contours, 1 foot contours. Yeah, it's going to probably take me longer to find this than I would like. I should have perhaps looked at that before. Let me just see if I can get something happening here that will help. Yeah, I'll show you. Let's see. Part of a report here without, don't want to disclose my client's identity. All right. Yeah, that might be difficult to do the way I've set this up. Let me just take a screenshot. That'll work. All right. Yeah, and this is a very different, hopefully this isn't going to muddy the water, so to speak, for everybody, but this is just a screenshot out of a report we did. And we don't have, I don't have contour information on the screen here, but what it is QGIS, which is a software we use occasionally, not always, but in this case we did. So we got contour information for the project site and the area around it. And then it was able to, we were able to generate what's called a staller order. And what that is it shows water flows and they're different orders. So uh, I won't get into it too deep here, but the yellow, as all these branches come together, the colors change and they're more intense and they're more meaningful flows. And you can see the project site was right here, and it has several significant flows coming into it and then exiting down this bottom corner. But it was it's quite unusual because there's a rail line that runs right here, and that was, it's almost like a dam. So it was a constraint on the site. So a lot of water backs up here during the winter months. And we're trying to figure out whether we could actually put a design together that would meet our clients' needs. And this is very helpful because this basically shows us the micro watershed. And there are millions of gallons of water flowing onto this site annually. Not related to what we're doing with our assignment. Well, it is and it isn't. It would. We're not here to develop this kind of map for you, but it does show you that we're able to. There are a lot of different tools, design tools to utilize. And in this case too, we're looking at, you can see there's a road that comes across the top here. So there's a roadway that runs right here on both sides, of course. And you can see where water squeaks across further up and a little bit there. And then there's actually a road that comes down here. So even on acreage, so this is about 8 acres. So in total, this is probably more like, 30. Um, roads are still impactful on the micro watershed, right? And here is showing us a little bit of creep over the road. And I can't verify. There's probably a culvert here and here. I'm not totally certain of that though. But anyhow, that is just out of more of interest than anything. Share a little bit of what we're doing. And yeah, again, Joshua, you're quite right. It can be definitely challenging, but that's in part what um here, let's just go back. We got a couple minutes. Go back here and hmm, so if we go back to that template file. Now I can't draw on it. Well, yeah, I can actually. So if we go to that practice sheet, there's one of our tools that we can utilize. And I can start a little bit of that. So if we're looking at the watershed boundary for this, we would be starting at the bottom and going across. So nothing that happens here, a drop of water hits here, it's well beyond the project site, right? It's not influencing this at all because it's lower in the landscape. But this bottom corner, we start to come up and we're going to be going uphill here at right angle to contour. And eventually it's going to shift over and we're going to end up on the top of this ridge here. We can do the same going this way. And I'm not doing this very accurately, but we're going to end up on this ridge too. And the reality is these get bridged by these high points. And we're going to end up with something like that, similar to that. So that's our boundary. And this would be our basin inside of that. If I can keep the line inside. So we know that if rain falls here, it could potentially have an effect on the project site. We may get runoff. So how do we know what the amounts that would be? If we look at the worksheet in if we look at the worksheet in that water flows analysis, we're looking at our own site here. Sorry. What we would need to do is access, I'm not sure if there's tutorials within this, but it's like a roof surface. So if water hits a roof surface, you're not going to collect 100% of that water. It really is determined on the type of roofing material. So the ground is the same, and it would have a coefficient factor built into it. So that is where we on land, that coefficient factor might be 0.2, and that, so 20%, right? So if you had a, a gallon of water hit um, uphill from this site, you know, you're going to get 0.2 of a gallon perhaps influencing that site. So there's the coefficient factor that we put into the formula, and it's all here, right? How to figure that out, whether that's in metric or standard units. And then just a little heads up when we get to the bonus extra water flow credit, that's optional. You don't have to do this, but this is your micro watershed. So if you put your micro watershed map here and figure out the calculations on this, you get extra 3 or 4 points, which, can't hurt. Yeah, so that covers that. I'm not sure if anybody's got any questions at all. Happy to look at those or take those. We'll just stop share. There we go. So that seem clear as mud, Tommy?
No, that seems very clear. Yeah, that's very
Okay.
helpful.
Alrighty. Well, that's great. Yeah, if nobody has any questions, I guess we will wrap up today's meeting.
I just wanted to actually ask, can
Sure.
you suggest anywhere to learn more about water harvesting while we're on water?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I will show you where you can access some good info. So in the US, oh, if you go to arcsa.org, that's the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. I took training from them. I also took training from CanArm, which is a Canadian equivalent. And yeah, these guys are great. I'm a member of ARCSA, and they have online educational opportunities. They have a third party testing, so they don't do the exams. They have a third party do the exams. And then what you do is you submit, you do an exam, you pass that, and then over time you can um, basically submit some of your projects to become I'm not sure what they call, well, I guess it'd be a certified designer or certified installer. So it's kind of a long-term thing. It's changed a little bit since I first got into it, but This is a great resource. And if you're a member, you have, access to all this research and a library that they've got. So that's where I would start, Tommy, is if you want to get into some training with that. The other,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. So the other is Brad Lancaster's website, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. And don't let that, you may say, oh, I'm on the West Coast, I'm not dry. Well, don't let that um, steer you in that direction. It's a great site. He's written some really good books, and I've got both these volumes, volume 1 and 2, and these are excellent resources. They're really good. So I would highly recommend those. And he also gets into sun and shade harvesting, which is fascinating. And he's got a property in Tucson, Arizona. Uh, there's active and passive shading. So this is fascinating. It's very, very interesting. He's able to passively cool his house in Tucson, Arizona, so no AC, and so that's quite remarkable. As well with the rainwater harvesting that he does, they do a lot of curb cuts and street runoff, and they've built some beautiful landscapes that basically rely 100% on rainwater coming off the roadways. They don't get any other um, rain, or they don't get any irrigation applied to them. So these are things that we can do, and we have done up in where I live. These, or they call these bioswales, or they're really a version of a rain garden. But here they're taking stormwater instead of roof water. But yeah, it's a fascinating subject, and it's one that when we're doing urban designs, um, we try and put a rain garden in pretty much every design we do, just especially if there's asphalt shingle roofing, because you want to try and remediate that and benefit the landscape. And like here, we've got stormwater coming off the road, pollutants and all kinds of nasties. But these kind of structures help to mitigate that. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful for you. Give you a place to start. So, okay. Well,
Thank you very much.
yeah, no problem, Tommy. I'm glad. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today. And best of luck with lesson 5. If you do have any troubles with it, don't hesitate to drop me a link a note. You can actually, let me just get this for you. I'll just put it in the chat. If you do have trouble, you can book a short Zoom call with me, and I can walk you through any challenges if you have. But yeah, the micro watershed is the tricky part, and just takes some practice, and you got to have some contour data. And Contour Creator is, of course, one of those places you can get it. Even though it's not horribly accurate, it's good for the exercise. And yeah, thank you again, everybody, for joining me today, and have a great week. And we look forward to seeing your assignments next Monday. So you take care, and thanks again.